click on like the pink, and then they click on the blue, and they end up doming you the whole night. Oh, hey, we're on the air.
Look at that. What a surprise.
Yes, this is, yes, welcome to Princess Robots. We're War Never Changes. Wait, that's not it.
Princess Robot.
Yeah.
Every time I'm trying to do a different, I don't know, I'm trying to come up with a nice, consistent theme song, but it's not really going well. So tune in next week.
You're in the zone to do that. And next week, I'm going to be probably going to be fucking dead, because in the discussion of video games, I'm going to be selling a lot of video games for Black Friday and on Thanksgiving, because I work Thanksgiving.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So let's try to distract me by talking about the stuff that I sell for a living.
Get your mind in a completely different place. That's a great idea.
We didn't have a broadcast last week, and we didn't have it a week before, but
yeah, it's been a while.
You know, life things and other stuff, and I think I texted you and I'm like, hey, I got a topic for a Princess Robot. Let's talk about video games, and understand you being the person who, like 5 or 6 years ago, thought they were probably Spawn of the Devil, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, you've now overshot me more or less, but we discovered that we can ramble a lot about this subject, if nothing else. So that's what we're here to do. And the most I've ever listened to in podcasts, as much as I love the Barcast with Flutter Priest and Anon and company, is I've listened to the Friendcast by two best friends, or super best friends should be more appropriate. They're a group of Canadian LPers do like podcasts about video games and pop culture like every week, and they're very consistent about it, and I admire it. And of course, I'm going to fuck up any attempt I make to emulate it. So let's just do this as haphazardly. How the fuck are we going to do this? I think we decided that we're going to touch upon, like, one at a time, like our history of video games, and I guess we can interject and talk about it, reflect on it as much as we want, and then we're going to do a top 5 like list of 5 to 1 of our favorite games of all time, because that's not going to be or anything. And now I'm going to put it out there that I sell video games for a living, so for me it's kind of old hat. I don't consider myself like a hardcore gamer. Ponky, I think you play a lot more than I do these days, or at least of the good shit, Bloodborne and whatnot. And I'm trying to catch up to that.
These days, yeah, that's probably true. And we'll get into it, but like you mentioned, and I have also said before in blogs and things, if anybody is sick of this story, but for most of my life, I didn't play video games, certainly not to any degree that was comparable to what most people my age have experienced, or I guess maybe my age and in my circles. So, even my friends and my contemporaries have played many more video games than me. And just very recently in my life, I would even say 2016 was when I really started getting into some games with seriousness, and I've really enjoyed them a lot.
So you're not going to have any sort of like super hardcore, angsty, privileged conversations from the heart of Vidya from the Chans or anything. This is just two fuckers that happen to occasionally do games. What was I trying to say? Oh yeah, you're saying how you had like almost zero upbringing in games. Me, I had quite a lot of exposure. But sort of snowballed in recent history as like games became like super crazy, like big shit, But why don't you start, Ponky?
Sure.
Ringleader yourself.
Yeah,
what is your history of video games?
Well, as I'm talking, I'm going to be eating some mashed potatoes, which is almost the first food that I've had today. So I apologize to everybody for that.
Would it be better if I fucking talked first then?
No, so I think it's fun.
Okay.
I think it's funny, and it gives me a nice distraction as I talk to kind of do two things at once and
simultaneously turning out to be a better gamer and a better Irishman than me.
Right.
Don't choke.
I won't. Let's see. It's hard to start, and I think that anybody would agree with me. It's hard to start in today's day and age of our experiences with anything technological, especially video games, because they seem to be such a normal part of life now. But that hasn't always been the case. They're really new when you look into it, and I love looking into it. I love going onto Wikipedia and reading the history of video games and the different generational consoles, because I missed most of it.
God,
and so to me, it's like an alien coming in and like experiencing these things from a distance, really, or at least through some kind of veil, because it's so amazing to me. It's so fascinating, not with nostalgia, but with interest and with awe. I'm just amazed by how incredibly quickly it has changed and developed, and also how much people love it.
I kind of envy that perspective too.
Yeah.
You know, except when you say like, I can't get into this N64 game. What the fuck? I'm like, dude, just grow into it. It's like, I can't. It's too old. Like, really?
Right. No, that's so true. In a lot of ways, it sucks because because my friends love Ocarina of Time. They love Super Mario 64. They even older than that. People have memories and feelings associated with the SNES, and I've never even seen one. I don't know what the thing looks like. If you put it in front of me, I wouldn't be able to tell you what it was or differentiate it from other machines. I'm so far from that world. My first video game console that I ever owned was a PlayStation 4. I still have it. I still play it. I love it. I also just earlier this year bought a Switch and have just made amazing memories on that machine. And it's strange because I know that one day I will be talking to people. I will have a conversation where I feel the same way about Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey that people my age feel about Ocarina of Time and Mario 64. And that's such a weird thing to me. But that's kind of in a different vein. As far as the history of video games, I had a couple of computer games when I was growing up. They were stupid and bad. And I've talked to people about how funny it is that like the nostalgia for it. And when you're a kid, you have a much more, I don't know, active imagination or something. And you can turn these stupid video games into a lot of fun just because of the way it happens in your mind.
Are you going to give that one anecdote? Are you chill enough with the Wonder Folk to actually give that?
Why not? Sure, I can do that.
Okay. Oh God.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it for you. When I was a teeny tiny kid, so I just want to say this first. The very first video game, I just figured this out literally 2 days ago. The first video game I ever saw with my eyes was, I don't know exactly what it's called, but it was the Batman game for the original NES. There's a 2D 2D scroller Batman game for the NES, and I remember. Oh, go ahead.
I think that may have been Hudson Soft or Konami who made that. It's a very good one. Hard as hell. Go on.
A lot of people, like it, and I had no idea, but I saw some. I was watching something. I watch a lot of YouTube about video games. And one of the reviews or something about Batman games that I looked at had just a moment of recording of that game, and there was this it was this shock in my system as I realized I remember seeing that. I was tiny, and my mom took me to a friend's house, and that friend had a child that was a few years older than me that was playing this Batman game on the NES. And I didn't know what an NES was. I didn't know what a TV was. I was that little. It occurred to me that they existed, but it didn't occur to me how any of it worked. And so I was just old enough to something clicked.
Can you pin how old you were in years?
I bet 4. I bet I was 4.
Because if that perspective, this would have been 97, and we're talking about an NES game, a 2D scroller NES game. So this is a game that would probably have been 10 years old at that point.
Yeah, I'm sure that it was the kid was playing something that was already in the family. That's very much how it felt.
Yeah,
to them, this was boring. To them, to these kids that were playing this, these older kids that were older than me. Oh, it's just something to do. It wasn't new. They weren't excited about it. They were just playing this Batman game. And when I looked at the screen and something in me, whispered, that little boy is controlling that little man in the TV. Oh my goodness. That is one of the most amazing feelings that I've had even to this day, to realize, oh my gosh, what an extension of the self. Even as a little kid, you realize how amazing that is, how unusual and special that is.
God,
and so
such a coolest recollections. Fuck.
It was so cool. It was such an amazing moment. I had no idea that that was the game. I remembered that it was a Batman game and that he was running to the right, but that's about it. And then when I saw this footage of that NES Batman game, I was floored. I couldn't believe that existed, in popular circles. But that was the very first time I saw it. So then I was enamored with the idea, and my mom didn't like the idea of video game consoles, and so we never had one. But I was given a few little CD-ROMs.
Yep.
And I remember having one for Toy Story that was a lot of fun that I enjoyed. I don't know if it was probably terrible, but I remember it being a lot of fun. I had all those Jumpstart games that taught you how to type and math and stuff.
Yeah.
I loved those, absolutely loved those. And I had a SpiderMan game, and I think that it was as I look at, footage again, I think that it was also on the first PlayStation.
In the late 90s, there was a really highly proliferated Spider-Man game. I forget it was based on the first Spider-Man movie. I think it was just generic Spider-Man.
It was just generic Spider-Man because it had a bunch of other characters. Daredevil, it had Catwoman.
Yeah.
And they all just made little weird cameos. None of it was like in the game. It was so weird. It was so weird. But it was at the end, Carnage and Doc Ock like teamed up, and it was so cool. Oh man, when Venom comes into it, I just absolutely adored that game, and I played it probably 15 times when I was a little kid. But my favorite game was Lego Island.
There it comes.
And then at one Christmas, I don't know how old I was, younger than 10, one Christmas, Lego Island 2 came out. And Lego Island 1 is this very intelligent, creative, thoughtful first-person game. Lego Island 2 was a lot bigger. Pepper is the main character, and he could ride a skateboard, and he could go all over Lego Island. He could go to lots of different worlds, and there were fun collectibles, and it was great.
It must have been great as a kid.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. Amazing to be a Lego that you could only just hold in your fingers up till that moment. And yeah, and I wanted to play it so badly. So I opened it on Christmas, and I was so excited and happy. And my mom said, you can only play it for hours a day. I don't remember what the stipulation was.
Right.
So I ate up all my time doing that, and then I had to do other things, spend time with family, I don't know, eat food. And then at night, I would sneak down into the basement where we had our family computer. And I would, you think that that you're a ninja when you're a little kid. You think that it's this big operation and that you have to be so quiet. I remember being so scared that someone would catch me. And I got all the way downstairs, and I would boot up the computer, and it's so loud in the 90s.
Yeah.
And it starts up. Yeah, exactly. And you're like, crap, someone's going to hear me. And I put in the CD, and it's even louder than the computer is.
Yeah.
And then I would play for hours and hours and hours. And one time, and you're one of the only people that I've ever told this, one time I was playing it, and I was so invested, and I loved it so much, and I was doing something. I was probably in some medieval world, I don't know, and I had to pee, but I didn't want to get up to pee because I loved this game so much, and I wanted to play it, and I wasn't old enough to realize the danger there. And so I was just playing and playing and playing and so invested, and I refused to get up to pee, and I was probably there for hours. And all of a sudden, I just peed my pants. And I was this little tiny kid sitting in front of a computer, and my jaw dropped, and I was just like, no way did that just happen to me.
Did you leave?
And I realized, I jumped up. There was a bathroom right there in the basement, and I jumped up and ran into the bathroom, but it was too late. I was on some little blue fold-out chair, and that was drenched in my urine.
Turned green.
And my pants were ruined. And I stood in the bathroom and stared at myself as well as I could in the mirror because I was very tiny, with tears in my eyes. I was just like, I'm screwed. What do I do now? There's no hiding this, like there's no pretending that this didn't happen. And I actually remember going to my mom and just telling her.
Oh, yeah, of course, because you're that young.
Yeah, rather than being caught or like trying to hide it. I just went straight to my mom and said, Mom, I was playing Lego Island 2 and I peed my pants. So and no kidding, really from that moment is where I decided, apart from my mother's influence, I decided that video games were bad and dangerous because they could do that to a person. I didn't realize it because they could control you so much to the point that the things in real life mattered less than the things that were on the screen.
It's the chain on the elephant's leg. Fast forward to like 20 years later, and you're in front of Best Buy buying a PS4, and you spontaneously piss on the floor. Like, oh god! And there you thought things got real in the barcast. Robot. No, I love that story. About I remembered it differently. I remembered like, I don't know. I think the way you originally told me in like the missives or something is that your mother came up and discovered you in the morning, like, you know, on the soiled chair, and like, oh god, that's sadder. That's like the Don Bluth version that you just said right there.
Yeah, that's the way that I remember it right now. And of course, it was so long ago. Who knows the details? But I do remember that feeling of dread, that feeling of I can't hide this, you know.
Yeah.
So that's a funny little story. But from there, I had tiny experiences with video games. But really, after that, there was nothing. There was nothing for decades. And I always had this opinion that video games were bad.
Didn't stop you at other people's houses, right?
Yeah, I watched my friends play a lot of games.
Yeah. Okay.
And there were definitely some games, and I'll get into that later, that I did play and experience. But on the, you know, all in all, that was really my last, the last moments that I loved a game that I owned until I was an adult. So go ahead, tell me, as I finish my potatoes here, launch into your very different experiences with early video games.
It sounds like you went about halfway, so I'll go halfway too. How about that?
Sure.
I don't have anything nearly as nuanced about like the first discovery of person, avatar, input, output. You know, I mean, I feel like I was exposed really young, but you were exposed really young too. I feel like as a kid, I think I grew up just being aware of, if not Nintendo, at least the like the aesthetic of Nintendo, of Mario. I mean, living in the '80s, there was like a smell, kind of like a feel, like a static electricity to the '80s. You know, a lot of people joke about it, but it was legit. It was real. I remember like I think like hanging out with my dad on the go, and he had like a car phone. It's like, oh, technology, and I fucking love the shit out of Tron. If you're ever gonna have like a podcast about like movies, that's the best one for the ages. But and I as a kid, because my father was disabled, he kind of became the like the housekeeper or the homemaker while my mom went to work, and so I didn't really get out as much unless I was with him. So most of my time at home, because he was out of it a lot, was okay, turn on the Disney Channel, record this, you know, and that's how I kind of got, you know, engulfed in Disney. But also like Tron was like one of the movies I watched the most, and that would like the whole subject of that was video games. Even if the movie itself doesn't seem to have much to do with it on the surface, it was about people living in a computer world. So that idea of computer world people and like electronic mystique was kind of like in my head. But actual gaming, I feel like I was first inducted in it with my family. The first thing I remember was the Texas Instruments home computer, which was like an alternative Atari that was meant to be sold as a utilitarian, like, you know, applicable device for around the house. So like doing office stuff and for other things. It's a remarkable device. You can look it up on people who are doing like nostalgic recreations and refurbishments of it and stuff. It's like the motherboard was integrated into the actual keyboard unit, and to the right of the keyboard unit, you had the spot where you put like the cartridges in, and it had like these expansion modules for like a speech synthesizer and a whole bunch of other stuff. But they would have the basic style, like almost like Atari like controllers, but even shittier. And then they'd have like cartridges that were basically Atari level of gameplay and performance. And there's a lot of stuff from that age that I don't remember the name of. I just remember playing. And my sister was into it because my sister and I did almost everything together back in the day. And some of the first oldest games I remember was this thing called Amazing. Sounds just like the pun from Overwatch. It was where you played as these tiny little pixelated mice, and you had to like avoid these giant cats through mazes, and sometimes you had the mazes would be obscured by fog of war. You'd have like these little mouse holes you'd cheat to go through to avoid the cat and stuff. There's a game called Hidden Tech that was like a that was like a remake or ripoff off of Joust and Balloon Fighter. There was a Dig Dug knockoff called Anteater. There's this game called Alpineer where you're like this basically a Canadian climbing like this mountain, and if you like if you hit a bear or something, your character will go "Ugh," and you just fall down, and you hear a voice going onward and upwards. So a really basic.
I have to interject and just say that you reminded me of a game that was on my dad's first laptop, the kind that was like 3 inches thick and had a stupid little green eraser in the middle for a mouse.
Yeah,
like amongst the keyboard.
Like that.
Yeah, there was a game on there where you were just a skier, just going downhill. And
oh, dude, that's ski free, right? I think that's what it's called.
Maybe I should look it up. I have no idea. I just barely remembered it when you said that. You were just skier going downhill, and there was a Yeti at some point that was one of the obstacles. And it was so scary. I was terrified of that. It's just a stupid.
Yeah,
it's like 6
confirms
pixels.
It's free.
Yeah. Oh my gosh! I remember how terrifying that was.
I forget what it was. I think if you hold down the shift key, your character would go faster. And as long as you did it forever, you would, you stay away from the Yeti. But eventually, the Yeti would catch up to you because you'd crash into something and whatever.
Oh, it was so scary. I was terrified of that. I loved it, but it was so scary to me.
Sometime back in 2013, someone I believe made like the people who do like the pony trailers. They made a pony movie. Like Ski Free the movie starring Rainbow Dash, and it has like Rainbow Dash like trying to go down this hill, and like Fluttershy is like, no, Rainbow Dash, and it's because the Yeti's out loose. It's stupid, but at the same time nostalgic and funny. Yeah, the Yeti GIF from Ski Free is like eternal. I mean, it's stronger than fucking Galactus from the Marvel franchise. It's like the most deadly thing in the universe.
That's awesome.
But the shit I'm talking
about,
the Texas Instruments stuff, it was like early 80s tech that was a hand-me-down, and so I was playing like Atari level stuff in that period of time, and after that I think we either borrowed or we also like inherited an Intellivision, and I didn't know what it was until I looked back at it and I saw like retrospectives on it. I was like, oh my god, we had an Intellivision. Intellivision was like a pre-Nintendo. It was around the same age as ColecoVision and I think the second generation Atari, like the 5200 or something, and it was kind of like a really basic 8-bit device, and it had stuff like Burger Time on it. I'm sure you saw the Game Grumps play Burger Time.
Yeah,
we watched a lot of Game Grumps, Punky and I introduced him to it after he came back from the from his mission. I didn't think he'd be into it, but apparently he freaking loves it, and God knows I love it too. But they also had a B-17 bomber, and my father's been like a World War II buff all his life. And B-17 bomber was an epic game. It had a voice module on it, and it simulated you going on bombing runs at a B-17 over like World War II, Nazi-occupied Europe. And so you'd have like this key, the controller had a number pad on it. And you would put like a plastic overlay over the number pad and would have intaglia on it representing the different windows of like the B-17. So when you would hear the voice module say like, Borgie, 6 o'clock, you would go to the rear gunner, and then you'd see like this little diagonal, looks like a MS Paint black line moving. That's an enemy fighter jet, fighter plane. You have to shoot it down.
Wow.
Really cool concept, but just the barest like execution. And that was the kind of shit I was like experimenting with. As for the Nintendo, like I said, I always kind of knew about it, and the classic Mario mystique certainly grabbed me by the. Well, I guess I didn't have balls then. And I think it was the winter of 88 or 89, I think it was 89, that my family purchased one used off of another family in the church or whatnot. And we knew it because my sister opened up the second to last gift, and it was a exercise video game. And it's like, well, we don't have a Nintendo, do we? Open up the last present,
Oh, that's so cute.
And so we had we had the triple pack. It was Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, and Track and Field. Track and Field, I feel like this might be Greek to you. Track and Field had the mat that you'd lay down with like 8 pieces on it, kind of like a twister mat. But there were inputs on each of like the squares, and you would stand on the inputs, and it would simulate stuff in game. So you'd have this. Dude, I was thinking about this before this podcast. I would love to God to show you the Angry Video Game Nerd videos. Did you ever watch any of those Angry Video Game Nerd?
Just a few, not a lot.
Okay.
Just enough to know the humor and the style.
I would love to somehow get you to be exposed to more of those. Maybe you won't love them as much as Game Grumps, but what's amazing, you keep talking about you want to know the history of games. He gives you history while at the same time lampooning it and just being his like obnoxious self. And he's a cool guy in real life, like James Rolfe. He's amazing. But for me, a lot of that stuff is shit that I knew, that I grew up with. So it's like a weird revisiting for me. So, you know, Duck Hunt was like a light gun game, as most people with nostalgic goggles know, where you had like a zapper. It was like a gun with like spring action to it. You aim it at your TV screen, and what happens when you pull the trigger, the item that you're trying to shoot turns for like a split frame. Everything on the screen turns black except for the target, which is white. And your gun is supposed to have like an infrared sensor that'll tell if you're aiming at the white part of the screen or not. That would simulate accuracy. That was how it worked back in the day. And so Duck Hunt was a popular game where you're shooting ducks, and there's like a little dog that would laugh at you to fuck it up. And you have like 3 shots, and you have to get the ducks down in 1 shot. So they had that, Track and Field, and Mario all in one package, and that was like the jam. They sold so many copies of that. And so we had that. We had 2 controllers, and I remember, I think the day after Christmas or something, I'm walking in, and suddenly we had this new video game, and I think it was Tiger Heli on the NES, which was like a vertical shooter, and we were helicopter shooting stuff. And like, whoa, did you buy another game? No, it was rented. Rented? What do you mean rented? It's like, yeah, Blockbuster video lets you rent video games.
All right, yeah.
Really? And that was an entire lifetime, entire childhood was, you know, maybe once or twice a month having the luxury to go to Blockbuster and rent a game. And God forbid, it's like the best game that you could possibly get, or most likely it's a shot in the dark and it's total suckage. And being in the
but there's something wonderful about that I don't get anymore. About that. Like when you're a kid, and maybe even beyond being a kid, when video games were new like this, they had to be so creative, and there wasn't any, you know, box. There wasn't a box saying, oh, all video games have to be like this. They were making these pads you're talking about, you know, and they have little guns, and like anything you can think of, people were trying to make it. And that's so cool, because today it just kind of feels like a lot of games are just the same thing with a different skin over and over and over. And
maybe I can see that.
At least the popular ones, you know, the ones that everybody sees and talks about.
The reason I bring up Angry Video Game Nerd is because he brings back a mentality that I forgot in this day and age. In this day and age, video games is like a bigger industry than the movies. So, it also has the fucking toxic fan base. That's just the nature of things. But there's so much exposure, so much publicity, so much information overload that it's very hard to be surprised by anything gaming wise. That's why when Breath of the Wild came out, people were like spamming on like Twitter, like, keep it like a secret, don't spoil the experience, because what Breath of the Wild, to my knowledge, I haven't played it. I know what happens because I spoiled myself because I'm a fucking idiot. But people like you and others who experienced it, with that game, they're trying to restore the spontaneity and surprise and magic, so to speak, of the original Zelda game, where you take a wrong turn, you fucking die. We're not talking Dark Souls, we're just being hard for the sake of being hard. It just was everything would surprise you, everything would be unique.
So surprising,
right?
Yeah.
That's hard to get in this day and age because because games have to be marketed to such a large audience, and they're all about making money. There's so many obligations by the advertisers, by the publishing company, to reveal bits of it, to preview it and stuff. You didn't quite have that back in my day when I was, playing a lot of 8-bit stuff in the NES era. Sure, like because the gaming industry had like a collapse. They almost died out entirely during the Atari era because they oversaturated. Like the Atari generation wanted to be like what it is today, but the public was not buying it. Then Nintendo came and pretty much single-handedly rescued like the industry from like ruin with creativity, like kind of the shit you're talking about.
Yeah.
But not everyone was good at it, and you had a lot of people kind of throwing money at stuff even in the NES period, and they would either rely on the cover art or on a trademark or like a property, like a television or a movie or something, just to get it sold. And if you bought it and you took it home and it turned out to be other garbage, then well, too tough shit, because there wasn't really any review system back in the day. There wasn't like sort of way to know what you're getting into. There was like, I think like Zapinator was saying in the chat, there's just the cover art. And even in the Atari generation, a lot of stuff would be sold by that. So I'd spend, hours at a Blockbuster, like, just perusing the cover art and like, ooh, do I really want to try this game? It looks gory from, it's just a horizontal shooter. Maybe. What's in this game? We don't know until you take it home, and it turns out it's utter shit, and you just ruin your whole weekend. Oh, well.
Try again next week. Right.
But also the standard is a bit lower then, too.
Yes. And it's amazing to see how the video game industry goes through cycles, just like anything else. And I think the reason, and I like you're talking about the video game, the crash, and the sort of the resurrection of it with more and more creative stuff, and that is amazing. It's amazing because it's so recent to me.
Yeah.
It's so it was. It's still older than I am, and so I have to read about it as if it was a history book. But at the same time, it because I know it was just within my parents' lifespans, it blows my mind because you can see it. It's so fast. It's all happening so fast. You can see these familiar things that happen in other industries over a very long amount of time in this super fast forward medium of video games, and it's fascinating to me. It's amazing.
And because I lived through most of it, I went through kind of the standard gauntlet that a lot of other people did. If I meet other people my age, you kind of eventually have a conversation. Like, I was a Nintendo kid, or I was a Sega Genesis kid, and then you had that one gay person in the corner who's like, I was a TurboGrafx kid. I'm like, okay, pretty much the gauntlet was Nintendo Entertainment System. And that was when I was exposed to Super Mario Bros. 3, which owns everything. And I also played Super Dodgeball, which was a great game. I also did a lot of North and South was great. I had one of the Top Gun games, which sucked, but is what I knew, and I enjoyed it. I did play some Zelda. I had like some neighbors nearby who let me both Super Mario Bros. 2 and Zelda, and I was able to play a bit of that. But I don't feel like I was ever like super hardcore serious with any NES stuff. I mean, I almost beat Super Mario Mega Man 3. Was the first ever gotten a relatively challenging game, was getting to like the Mega Man 2 bosses at the end of Mega Man 3. But I was constantly exposed. I wouldn't call myself, I'm a professional gamer. I'm doing this competitively, because that didn't really exist. You just kind of did it to pass the time. Lo and behold, fast forward to like the early 90s, and I'm sitting in the vehicle with my dad waiting to pick up my mom up from work, and makers of Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo of Japan, announced the Super Nintendo coming out in 1991. And I'm like, what the fuck? It's a new system. And, and that's when I finally had my first exposure to like release hype. And
that's so cool.
I couldn't get it, and I knew I couldn't get it ahead of time. I'm sure I badgered the fuck out of my parents about it for the Super Nintendo. And I think they kind of knew that eventually I'd be roped in, the family would be roped in, but I kind of had the understanding that I couldn't play it for a while. So some of my first exposure to that was playing it through family members and friends and that kind of stuff, until finally we got it. My this is going to sound horrible, but my grandfather passed away, and part of his estate was some money bequeathed to different members of the house, of like the family, and that was sort of like the boost my parents needed to say, okay, we can indulge them in the Super Nintendo. So I remember this one.
That's how it has to happen, man. The old generation has to go before the new generation can rise.
This is a surreal experience. I think a month or two after my grandfather father's funeral, we buried his ashes. He didn't have an urn. He had like there's another name for it, I can't pronounce it, but it's like a wooden urn. And I guess I wanted to be part of the experience, and I'm like, I'll carry his remains. And I didn't, as a kid, you kind of just don't think about things that hard. So I remember the same day I carried my father's ashes to the grave. That same evening, I carried a Super Nintendo to the layaway section of a Walmart. Did I ever wrote that to you? I don't.
You did.
Oh my God, I did. Okay, because that's usually the anecdote I always give.
It's fantastic. It's hilarious.
It's fucking weird, but it's that. There you go. That's '90s kid childhood for you.
It's beautiful.
Super Nintendo.
That's Super Nintendo, man.
I had
Rising from the ashes.
I had Rise from your grave. I had a Super Nintendo. I had Super Mario World, which was the must play, obviously, and then I had Pilot Wings, which I loved to death back in the day. And you wouldn't do anything. You wouldn't do the missions normally in Pilot Wings. You would just fuck around. I remember trading in my system for the first time. I gave up my old Nintendo. I no longer have it. In '92, I gave it up at a video game trade place in Maitland for 3 games. It was super. God, what was it? It was Super Soccer. It was Desert Storm, I think was the name of it. It was like a helicopter game set in like the Gulf War, and I forget what the third one was. It may have been Super Star Wars, possibly. But that was the first, when I did that trade, was the first time I saw Mario Kart, and I was being exposed to the idea of like was Mode 7, they called that, just all the stuff you can do with the graphics. And I personally believe, you say you can't recognize the Super Nintendo if you saw it. Maybe if you saw it, you would. If you saw gameplays for it, you probably would. Super Nintendo is arguably the best video game system ever made. And I believe that holds up to thank you, Floydian, Desert Strike. Super Nintendo, I think, is the best video game ever made because holds up to I want to say the technological limit it had, because after the Super Nintendo went by, you had PlayStation 1 and N64 and Sega Saturn, and those are all good systems. They don't date as well. They don't age as well, because you look back in like early 3D graphics, it looks like shit, because they're trying to create a 3D thing with the technology, but it's obviously not realistic. Everyone looks like a plastic Muppet or something. Super Nintendo, with like the 16-bit and the bright like graphics and the wonderful stereo sound quality, it kind of achieved the perfect aesthetic with what they're able to do. And I feel like we didn't reach that again until PS3 and 360 era. I mean, even today with the PS4 and Xbox One, yes, they're better, but they don't seem as improved from PS3 and 360 as, say, Super Nintendo was to NES, or maybe PlayStation 3 was to PS1. It feels like it took more time to fill in that suspension of disbelief. But with Super Nintendo, they achieved like a greatness. And even though I have like a history of the console games, at the same time I was doing PC games. And it's weird. People say, "Oh, PC master race," or like, I do all my stuff in PC. I mean, when you grew up in the '90s, you kind of did both. If you eventually got a personal computer because it became a way of life. Obviously, what are we doing right now, right? But PC gaming was like its own thing, separate from console gaming, but it was still an experience. And I have like a separate sphere, a separate place in nostalgia for like early 90s, mid 90s MS-DOS, Windows, and CD-ROM based computer games. And sometimes when I want to be in a good mood, I'll go on YouTube and I pop in like a Sound Blaster 16 collection of just MIDI files and shit from the 90s. And you had to have been my age. You had to have been like maybe an 8-year-old or 9-year-old when you were born. We're talking 92, 93, to understand how magical and weird that sort of environment was. We're talking like shit like Castle of Dr. Brain and Echo Quest from like the Sierra titles, like the same people made us like Police Quest and Space Quest and stuff. The LucasArts games like X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, the Monkey Island series. early CD-ROM was an experience and a half for me. That was when I got to play like Myst for the first time. I've gotten a long tirades about Myst. I didn't beat Myst until my adulthood, but it inspired me as a kid. It was one of the first games to scare me, and that sounds weird in hindsight. Do you know anything about Myst? I'm sure I've rambled to you about that before.
Not really. I've seen it. I know that it's spelled with a Y.
You can appreciate Myst, I think, even by today's standards, because it was one of the early CD-ROM games. It was a point-and-click game, but they went for minimalist HUD and like full immersion. And basically, you point your cursor, and it simulates panel by panel in still frames, mind you, moving around this. You had puzzles to solve, but they didn't give you any obvious hints. So you'd be walking and you see like this sunken ship in the harbor, but you walk into the middle island, you see this way and like this bird bath, and like, what the fuck? What does this mean? But then if you look at enough clues are just sporadically, arbitrarily spread throughout the island just for exploration's sake, you realize there's a connection to everything, and you start interacting, and you realize that you can actually solve these puzzles that take you to other worlds that have similar puzzles, and you're trying to unlock this mystery of what happened to the islands, why they're all derelict, and what happened to the people who created the worlds. And at its time, for its CG rendered like visuals, even though they were just still frames, and its soundtrack, it gave you this sense of isolation that was a really immersive, and it made me feel really creeped out. I play in the dark, and I couldn't do it for more than 5 minutes. I would freak out, just have to turn the damn thing off, even though nothing would jump out at you. It was not a scary game per se, but it was the first time I felt really immersed, because with CD-ROM technology, they can get sound and motion video and other stuff incorporated, and it just felt so cool. It's so real.
Wow, that's awesome.
A game. Go on. Sorry.
No, it's just. So I'm looking at the comments. It's gone now, but somebody mentioned putt-putt on CD-ROM.
Yeah, that was something you probably would have played, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I didn't even remember it until now. At my grandma's house, I used to play putt-putt all the time. But it's just funny because, so I have these nice memories of little, point-and-click games. I have memories of being amazed at video games, and then all of a sudden it all goes away, and like I always feel a little bit sad when I talk about video games like this, because I hear the excitement in your voice, and I can see it, I can see these memories coming to life. But I only get that feeling when I read about it as an outsider. I didn't have those experiences, and that's kind of sad to me. And the reason that it's sad to me is that I have tried. There's a big thing right now where retro games are in, like a lot of people are making retro games again. Almost 75% of the games available on the Nintendo Switch eShop are retro games.
Are you talking about games that are made to feel retro, or legit recreations of older retro?
I'm talking about modern games that are made to feel retro. Shovel Knight is a good example.
That's part of my argument about the Super Nintendo being the best video game ever made. Even though Shovel Knight more emulates an NES 8-bit thing, I think is that people are coming to understand that trying to push the technological limit doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to improve the gameplay. A lot of that stuff had it locked in with their limitations, because they made a nuance and creative flair with it.
And clearly that's true. Obviously, you're right. People do agree with that. People are very on board with that. I am not. I don't like it. I try to play 2D scrollers. Okay. I tried to play point and clicks. I tried to play a lot of these games that are very popular right now because of that nostalgia factor, because people agree with you and believe, and even I agree that the SNES and that style of game were art pieces. They were thoughtfully designed. They were incredibly fun for people. I missed that. And for some reason, I can't enjoy it. I hear stories, and it breaks my heart. I hear stories all the time of modern kids today, and their parents will show them the Disney classics. They'll show them, Sleeping Beauty, or even more modern. They'll show them.
Wrong podcast.
they'll show them, you know, The Little Mermaid. I don't know, something that to me, The Beauty and the Beast, something that to me is an objectively fantastic animated film. And these little kids are not interested in them because they're boring to them. Because it's not flashy enough, it's not 3D. They don't understand this 2D style. It's not Minions. It's not yelling and screaming and colorful and bouncy, and so they don't like it. And that absolutely crushes me, because to think, I have always longed to sit down with my children one day and watch Aladdin and watch The Lion King, you know, and have the same experiences that my mother had with me.
Yeah, you can still do that. I think it depends on how you raise your kids.
And that's exactly what I hope is true. I hope that that's true, is that if I watch it with them from early on, they'll like it. Because I grew up with a VHS with 101 classic cartoon shorts of Betty Boop and Popeye and Felix the Cat. And I adore that stuff. I love that animation. Even today, it's some of my favorite. And so I hope that a similar thing will happen for my kids, and that if I show them very early, you know, look how much Dad loves Aladdin, look how much Dad loves Beauty and the Beast, that they will agree with that.
You're gonna sit down with your kid and you'd be like, "Okay, Gentry, we're gonna read something called Background Pony." It's like, I want to go play with Play-Doh.
I'll wait until they're a little earlier. They'll always see, or a little later. I mean, they'll always see the book on the shelf. And they'll wonder what that is, and sometimes Dad will grab it and read it and cry, and they'll go to their rooms and just wonder what's happening in that story. And one day they'll find out. No, it is so sad to me to hear about these kids that don't enjoy this. And then I realize that I am that kid, because as much as I try, I cannot enjoy Shovel Knight. I don't understand Mario 3. Yeah. I play these games and I'm like, these are so hard and so frustrating and really, to me, boring.
At least
I don't understand it, because
time. At least you beat Ocarina of Time.
I did. I did play Ocarina of Time all the way through. I didn't like it as much as Majora's Mask, but I understood its importance. And you know, I'm on a Mario 3 kick right now, and I keep going back to it on my Nintendo 3DS, and that you so graciously sent me, and thank you for that. Yeah, but I've tried so hard to play that game, and I just get so mad, and it makes me wonder, why are video games still popular? Who in the world, what little kid sat down and played this enough that they grew up and made Dark Souls? Like, this game is so hard. It's so impossibly, stupidly hard. You get hit one time and you're just dead, and you just have to start over. And I
find Mario Brothers 3 way easier to get in. I find Mario. Oh, well, I won't get into that because that's for later. But I will breaking pattern a little bit. This is not on my top 5, but it used to be on my top 5. This is a weird choice for a favorite video game, and now it's just like a honorable mention. But Goof Troop on the Super Nintendo, and this is on the subject of like retro goggles. Not necessarily were all games better in that day for being simpler, but in the case of like Goof Troop, there's nostalgia attached to it, because I remember having a very good year. I remember having like the autumn air hitting, and every time it hits autumn, like immediately becomes like a nostalgia bomb for me, as way it is with like a lot of stuff. I remember the music just bring me back to a specific zone that just made me feel good in life, and so playing that game brings me back to that feeling. Not so much the game itself being good, because objectively speaking, I look back and that game only had like 6 levels. It was like the puzzles were a little bit obnoxious, and the music was actually really damn annoying and repetitive in hindsight. But you know, it's what you remember, what you experienced at the time, is sometimes more important than the long-lasting legacy.
And that's exactly what I think it is. I think you hit the nail on the head. That this is popular because today there are a lot of people my age and older who are enjoying video games as a pastime, and it's fun to experience new games in an old style, that they have these new experiences with that same feeling of nostalgia. And I think that's wonderful, and I love that. I'm happy that it's popular. I'm happy that that's happening. More than anything, I am sad. I'm genuinely sad that I don't get to enjoy them, simply because I missed that. You know, I didn't play those games when I was a kid, and so all I feel when I see these games popping up on the Nintendo eShop is disappointment, because I want another Breath of the Wild. I'm spoiled, and I realize that I only want to play Skyrim. I only want to play these huge, sprawling RPGs that allow you to live another person's life, and I can't. My imagination isn't supple enough to find that thrill in a 2D scroller. And I'm not criticizing anybody that does enjoy that. I'm just saying that I'm sad that I can't.
You have to let something surprise you, and I think that's what happened with. Well, I won't mention it because I don't want to ruin your top 5, but that's a little hard in this day and age because of the nature of the industry. For me, like, I would probably play a game like we're renting. Let me fast forward a bit, because I left at the Super Nintendo. I bought an N64. I got it like at the best time of my life to have an N64, which is fucking middle school. I was having friends over playing GoldenEye in like 7th grade. That was the shit. GoldenEye and like WCW versus NWO World Tour, Star Fox 64, the absolute best 4-player console gaming system of all time. It hit me when I was in puberty, and it was just like amazing. And why the fuck did I even want to go on this tangent? Fuck, I just clouded my mind with the unsung realm of N64. Damn it! I was fuck. Goldfish memory. I brought this up for a purpose, but oh my god, I blindsided myself. I just talk about N64 and I completely. N64 is a great system. I used to think it was like the best system ever, but it doesn't age as well if you look back at it. Damn it! I forgot what I was even trying to bring up the whole conversation about. Oh, let games surprise you. Yes, I remember renting Mischiefmakers on the N64 because I had nothing else to do. I guess I was sick that weekend or something. Like, what the fuck is this? And it turned out to be one of the best video game experiences I ever had. Mischiefmakers was like. God, it's a 2D scrolling game straight from Japan, super crazy anime and stuff, where you'd use a controller that was not designed for 2D scrollers, but you're playing this robot maid and you're tossing shit at bad guys, and every single level is like unique. They had like these roller coaster style levels in it. There's a level in the game where riding on the back of a Persian cat, riding on the back of a flying missile, or being chased by this robot wolf mech. It's just something you could not even pretend to expect, but I experienced it like spontaneously, and I loved the hell out of it. You don't really get that as much these days, unless you choose to be willfully ignorant and you walk in and you buy The Witcher 3, and it's like, oh my god, I just found a new existence. It's just everything is pretty much pandered to you, and it's not so much, oh, I like this game. It's, do I identify as a fan of this game? That's where you get. When every time a fucking difficult game comes out, like Cuphead, it's like, oh, it's a Dark Souls, a 2D scroller. It's like, God, can you just say it's a fun, original, nuanced game? Stop comparing.
Right. I totally get that.
Stop comparing it to Contra. Stop comparing it to Dark Souls. It's a one of a
kind.
kind.
It's a new IP. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm. So my base path in gaming was that I was doing stuff with my family with the Texas Instruments home computer, the NES, and then the Super Nintendo is when I started doing it more or less myself. And 64, my bros hung out like whenever we could, and we made entire game nights around killing each other with a golden gun and stuff. And then kind of after that, I more or less petered off because I was doing school a lot harder and kind of just didn't have the money nor the shits to give for getting a PS2 or like or something else. I ended up getting like a GameCube, but then I was kind of starting to fall back a bit. And this is where I throw it back to you and your modern day return to form. Yes.
Yeah, I guess so. So a lot of people know that I went on a mission for 2 years in Italy. And the structure of the mission is very, very specific, and you got to spend a lot of time with people, with the same group of people your age, and you really didn't have anything to do. You had to do the mission stuff, you had to do the religious stuff, and then as far as entertainment, everything was off limits. No TV, no internet, literally nothing. And that was difficult for me. But what we ended up doing was just talking to each other, telling stories to each other about things that we loved, movies that we loved that other people hadn't seen, games that we loved that other people.
I love your retelling of that. Like, We won't go into detail because there's some shit I don't want you to reveal on your sleuthing of old pre-skirts that even like the likes of Floridian and Forrest don't know about. But I love those stories you would tell, like how you found ways to have fandom conversations on your bicycles and shit.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, the mission was very hard, and overall, it was a difficult and draining experience. But I'm glad that I had it because of some of these little memories, like you know, sitting there in the dark with 3 other guys, and we were all just in our own chairs in this dark room, and one person was just talking. Yeah. And that's it, just talking about a book that they had read or a movie that they had seen, and the rest of us could see it in our minds just because we were so starved for entertainment. That was a special experience.
Just Anziani Talking, a story by Mithril Mormon. Go on.
That's really how it felt, and it was wonderful. But for a long time, whenever people would talk about video games, I would get really detached from it. I would get really disappointed. Because I felt like video games were bad. I felt like video games were destructive, really. That's how I felt.
Yeah, that's how I once felt about MMOs until I decided I just hated life and I played World of Warcraft.
Well, the funny thing is, I was lying to myself a little bit because, of course, I loved video games, or else that thing with Lego Island 2 wouldn't have happened. Later in life, I did go to friends' houses. I played a little bit of Assassin's Creed 2 at a friend's house. That was a life-changing experience that I'll talk about later. I played some SpiderMan 2 on the PlayStation 2. That was a life-changing experience. And so I had these wonderful moments with video games, but I kept convincing myself, and especially on the mission where everything righteous gets exacerbated, it certainly felt like video games were evil. And when I got home, actually before I got home, but especially when I got home, I decided to try some video games that some people that I loved on the mission had recommended to me. Yeah. So the greatest friend that I made on the mission, a fellow missionary, was named Stoll.
Yeah.
And that's his last name, and that's still what I call him just because we all used each other's last names. And Stoll was wonderful. I told him a lot about ponies and especially Background Pony. He actually read the first chapter of Background Pony, and we cried over it together. It was an amazing experience. Yeah, just the one chapter. So cool. Anyway, he was great. Really loved him. Still love him. We see each other often. I just went to Thor Ragnarok with him. But nice. Yeah, he told me you absolutely.
Hey, how did you see a movie? You said there's no movie theaters around you. What the fuck?
I went all the way up to Salt Lake. It was a long drive, 2 hours. 2 hours.
Do it more for your own sanity.
I would love to. I love movies.
Watch Blade Runner.
That was a lot of fun. Okay, yeah, I'll have to watch the first one first, but I'll get there. Yeah. But anyway, so you know, you Skirts wrote me a lot on the mission. You wrote me wonderful, gigantic missives that I treasure. I'm looking at them right now. They're behind me in my office. Oh. But
mine's on the floor.
I love them, and one of them dove very deeply into Majora's Mask, and I think I got that during this period that I was with Anciano Stoll in the city.
Because I remember you telling me about catching up with it after I sent you that big ass like missive about it.
Yes, yeah, you wrote me a huge missive about your experience with Majora's Mask, and I told Stoll about it, and I told Stoll specifically that Background Pony had been inspired in some ways by Majora's Mask, and he lit up like a candle and said, I love Majora's Mask, and started telling me about all the reasons that he loves Majora's Mask. And it meant so much to me. It was amazing to see these two friends that meant so much to me in my life at the time both talk about this video game with very, very high praise and a very meaningful and intelligent understanding of what the game was about and what it did to them. And so that really changed my mind. And when I got home, I decided I was going to give video games another try. And it took me a long time. It took me more than a year after I got home before I really sat down to try. But the first game that I played on Stoll's recommendation was The Witcher, the first Witcher game.
Yeah, the first one. Interesting.
The first Witcher game, I played it on my computer, and it was incredible. That was absolutely amazing. It was amazing. It was an amazing story, amazing character, really fun gameplay. Just everything about it was so surprising to me in how much of an art piece it was, really. that it felt like reading a book or watching a movie.
Exactly.
But it was more, you know, you were in it, you were part of it. And wow, that first Witcher game just blew me away. It was so big and so thoughtful and philosophical and funny, and like I was just so into it. And I finished that game quite quickly, and then asked Stoll, you know, okay, what's next? I liked that.
He's your dealer.
Yeah,
dealer,
exactly. Yep. That's how it felt. And he started telling me about all these different games, and I got a little bit overwhelmed. And what I ended up doing was, for my birthday that year, whatever that year was, 2015, I think, 2016 maybe, I just splurged. I did it, and I bought a PlayStation 4. And the reason was, oh my gosh, the reason was Game Grumps were playing Bloodborne at exactly that time. And I was watching that, and I was enamored. I was just like, oh my gosh, every single thing about Bloodborne called to me and made me feel like it was made for me. And so I bought a PlayStation 4, and I bought I got Dark Souls I got Bloodborne as my first game, and I couldn't stop playing. It's still amazing to me, a true masterpiece of video game design, and I played the heck out of it, and then I started just going from there. You told me to get Skyrim. I got Skyrim on the PlayStation 4.
Yeah, I told you to get a lot of shit.
When it came out in October, the remaster. Beautiful, beautiful remaster. Anyway, lots and lots of games. I played through the BioShock series on your recommendation on the PlayStation 4.
I'm very glad he got through those.
Yeah, and a ton. I won't keep going, but I really dove in. You know, I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go 100%. So I got tons of games, and I had a lot of just, I mean, over the top, ecstatic experiences playing these games that I had always kind of heard of or wanted to play. So the PlayStation 4 was my first console, not the NES, not the SNES. The PlayStation 4, yeah, the PlayStation 4 was the first time that I played video games to a degree that you know, I got good at them, and I couldn't wait to play, you know, and when I wanted to, I just did. It wasn't like no one had me on a timer, like, you know, I wasn't a kid anymore. And so that was just incredible to me. That was that's a strange introduction, but also the right one for me, because I'll never go back. I had so many wonderful experiences.
Better late than never. But you know, it's working for you, which is great, because you know, gaming isn't for everyone, despite what some people might think. For some people, like, it may not just click. It may not be like the thing for you, but it looks like you gave it the monetary sacrifice, but it's paid back in dividends. Is actually something you dig up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So finish yours then. What's the big finale leading up to today?
I won't go into like crazy ass detail. Obviously, I think just playing games sort of balloons in time, and you end up playing more and more. I've been working at my job for quite a while. Because of that, I've been exposed to a lot of games and such. But also, you know, if you work at a shoe store, do you want to come home looking at shoes?
No, of course not.
So I kind of felt, even though I was always exposed to it, I also kind of have a distance personally from a lot of games, and so I would just keep like a knowledge of it that I can use to sell the stuff. But you know, there's a lot of stuff that came out in the last couple of years that I have not played, even though they're very popular. I didn't do all the Gears of War games. I certainly haven't played all the Call of Duty games. I still haven't played Dead Space 1, and that's one of the ones I look back and like, I wish I played that. But generally speaking, the series that I have sort of kept up to date with as much as I can is like any of the Grand Theft Auto games. I played Halo 1, 2, and 3, Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3. You know, that franchise obviously I was big on. But I want to say for like the last 5-6 years or so, mostly it's been me, maybe longer than that. God, probably it's 10 years actually at this point. Fuck. Mostly online PC stuff. And to me, gaming has sort of turned at least the type of gaming I do, like casual gaming, is more like a thing to pass time. It sort of came back to form, like what it was when I first started gaming, where it's really just to pass the time. But because there's so many other forms of input, like YouTube and television and other stuff, like multimedia, MP3 players and stuff, for me, chilling to a game is like sitting down and playing a game, maybe turning the volume down, having music or a podcast or something in the background. It's not. I kind of deviated away from games with a storyline, like what you would probably consider games, and more like online experiences that have like a social pull to it, that I feel, even if in an artificial sense, that I'm interacting with other individuals with minimal responsibilities, if it makes any sense. And because of that, I feel like I've numbed myself to what you are starting to experience now, like the really cool, oh my god, experience you get from playing like a game and having those nostalgic bombs for the first time. For me, it's more of a casual kind of exposure. I don't feel like I get as entrenched or involved. Occasionally, I might have like a like a good run. Like in 2013, I had while you're on the mission, I had a job crisis, and my one outlet was to grind hardcore into my Skyrim character on the 360, and I was enjoying the hell out of that because I needed to, because it was like an escape. BioShock Infinite and Grand Theft Auto 5 were probably the last two games I remember with really intense appreciation. Like, oh, here's a game that I felt lived up to its hype and really got me like grasped, and I felt like I was really involved with it. But for the most part, a lot of my stuff has been casual since then. So I kind of live off of nostalgia. But I feel like what a lot of gamers make as a mistake is that they channel that nostalgia into their expectations, and they're always disappointed. For me, I tend to simplify things. I'm like, I just want to play this at a time. I want to play that. I'm not very good at juggling a bunch of stuff. So like right here and now, right now in my life, I'm playing a lot of Overwatch. I'd go into XCOM 2 on the PS4. When I'm really lazy and bored, I'll play Pinball Arcade on the PS4. I've been doing some casual Grand Theft Auto 5 online, just ride around and listen to podcasts or something, just whatever, get high off of Dr. Pepper and chill, that kind of stuff, It's not like, oh, I gotta have like the latest Assassin's Creed Origins and I gotta play the story and I gotta know how it ends. I don't quite get that like I used to, and that's unfortunate. I kind of miss that, but at the same time, I'm kind of content. I'm like a contented gamer and not like a thrilled one. And I'm certainly not I'm not hardcore enough to be like competitive about it. When I play Overwatch, I don't do the competitive mode. I just do like quick play or arcade because I just like doing crazy stuff and occasionally capturing something to put on YouTube that only 5 or 6 people will see, but whatever.
Yeah, no, I think that's really cool. I think I'm glad that you said that in a way you kind of miss that feeling, the hype or whatever, but you're also content, because I agree with that, and I think I should say that. I don't mean, I like the way that I've experienced video games. I'm really happy with it. In a lot of ways, yeah, I'm a little sad that I can't enjoy a lot of the games that are popular right now, but I do get to enjoy games at all. So that's exciting on its own terms, and I'm happy about that. With that, do you mind if I just launch into my top 5?
Yeah, you do your 5 and I'll do my 5. We'll just do it that way.
Sure. So we've already gone long, but I think this is going to be a long podcast, and whoever wants to stick
I don't
around,
mind if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. Whoever wants to stick around is welcome to. Of course, this is on YouTube, so you can always come back and listen to it.
If you're watching us in the future, how's a thermonuclear winter?
Yeah. Speaking of which, Fallout is not on my list, but
that's fine. You played it for a day, didn't you?
Yeah. But funny enough, my number 5 in my personal top 5 video games is The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim.
Yay.
And I know that a lot of people, and I went out of my way recently to go on YouTube and try to experience every single Elder Scrolls game. And I watched little bits of gameplay from everyone without any commentary, just people playing it.
Including like arena and shit?
Yes, everything. Everything that I could. with that,
yep. Go on.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to formulate this sentence, but with that, I didn't know anything about the Elder Scrolls, obviously. Skyrim was the only one that I had ever played. With that context of how incredibly innovative and gigantic and surprising the Elder Scrolls has been, Skyrim, I don't think is the best one they've made.
Well put.
By a long shot. For me, as an unexperienced gamer who comes into the field and sits down for the first time and plays Skyrim as one of the first video games that I've ever experienced deeply, almost brings me to tears how incredible it was. It was unfathomably immersive. In a completely unprecedented way. I felt like I was there.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I was Quickall, this character.
Oh, you made me into your character Quickall? That's cool.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was a wood elf. Like that was me. I had always been a wood elf. I was trying to do the right thing, but a life of crime kept calling to me because I was really good at it. And sooner than later, I got caught up with all kinds of nasty things. And I eventually had to choose which of 3 people to kill. And anyway, just all of this stuff started happening to me. It wasn't that I was playing a game. I was going through experiences, you know?
Yeah.
And that was amazing. And I don't think I'll ever really feel like that again because it was my first experience of that style of game. I had never played another RPG. I'd never done this. And so to level up my character, to choose my skills, to, you know, it was amazing. And I in a lot of ways, I think it deserves better than top 5, but these other games mean so much more to me that
it's more about nostalgia than it is about objectively superiority.
Yeah. And gosh, its glitches make me laugh so hard.
Of course, yes.
Oh I love, there's this one guard in Riften that just always sits on nothing in the middle of the bridge, and it always makes me laugh every single time I walk past. But I'm actually playing Skyrim right now, not literally right now, but these days I've started 2 new Skyrim characters that I bounce between because it's so fun. It's so fun to go through the world and the quests again, but instead of having a bow and arrow, you have a shield and a sword, you know, or magic, and it's just really clever that way, that your choices really dictate the story. I think that's very clever. My number 4 is Assassin's Creed 2 for the Xbox 360 was where I played it the first time.
Most people's favorite Assassin's Creed as well.
Yeah, phenomenal. I think that the story is brilliant. The characterization is fun. The little quests, just how big it is and how fast it is and how free it is was a really great experience for me. I played it at my friend Clayton's house, and I played it not a ton. Like I didn't even get halfway through the story, but I did get to play it enough that I was like, wow, this is good. And then just recently, this year, I finally, I think just this year, the Ezio trilogy or whatever, the remastered Ezio trilogy came out on PS4. And I bought that and played all 3 games. And again, I would still say, even though I've played several Assassin's Creed games now, I still think that Assassin's Creed 2 is the only one that makes my top 5 and is really, really a fantastic, creative accomplishment of a game.
Where in the punk chronology does Assassin's Creed 2 lie in relationship to your spaghetti boner for Italy and your discovery that you'd be going there as a missionary?
I have always loved Italy. My mom found a little like crayon drawing or something that I did when I was a tiny little kid. I don't remember at all, but that I had written at some point that I wanted to go on my mission to Italy. And my whole life I've loved Italy, people might not know this, but you don't get to choose where you go. Right. You submit your papers, and the people at the head of the church just, I don't know, throw a dart at the board. They say it's through spiritual inspiration or whatever, but now that I don't believe in that crap, I have no idea.
You sure someone didn't like pull any favors, did some secret baptisms behind doors or something?
No, I mean, there's no way. There's no way that could happen with my limited connections. These people are over 15 million members of the church.
So that video you shared with your sister, like screaming her head off, was
that's
legit.
My mom. Yes.
Or was your mom? I thought it was your sister who was screaming.
No, that's my mom that's screaming bloody murder.
All right, sure. Sorry.
No, it's fine. That's a weird
video. It could be worse. You could have been opening that envelope shirtless, for fuck's sake.
Oh gosh, yeah. I have made some interesting videos floating around out there. But yeah, I did go to Italy. I went to Italy when I was 19. I played Assassin's Creed 2 when I was 15 or 16. So it was quite a few years before that. But yeah, it was really weird to go to like Venice and know the streets because the game really did a good job of like setting up the cities the way that they are in real life. And that's, yeah, that was weird. That was a weird experience. My number 3 game is Spider-Man 2 for the PlayStation 2.
Oh boy. A lot of people
even to this day, I don't think that any game has captured the feeling of being Spider-Man like that one did.
Yeah.
It
one
really
of those
felt.
Like, if you remember Spider-Man 1, fuck no. Spider-Man 2, bitch.
Oh, Spider-Man 2 is amazing. It really feels like you're swinging through New York. It really feels like you're crawling on the walls. There were so many stupid little things to do in the city. Something was flashing at you like, go finish the game, go finish the story, and you're like, no, I gotta grab this little kid's balloon. And it was so much fun. It was so much fun. I felt like Spider-Man, and that was really cool.
And they remade that multiple times. They made like so Spider-Man 2 was great, so they made Spider-Man 3, Ultimate Spider-Man, Spider-Man Friend or Foe, Spider-Man Web of Shadows, and they're all just the same goddamn engine recreated, you know?
I guess, but it has never felt like you're actually swinging. I don't know. There was something really magical, just literally about the gameplay and about the which buttons you pressed even on that PlayStation 2 that just made it feel fast. It made it feel dynamic, and I loved it. So fun. I bet that if I went back now, the graphics are terrible, but man, the gameplay itself felt so good.
I think it was Activision who had the rights to Marvel.
That's right. Yeah.
And they may have, it wasn't Neversoft, but they may have been using the same engine for the Tony Hawk series, possibly. And if that's true, then that might explain how it was so awesome. Because Tony Hawk, like 1 through 4, and Underground 1 and 2 were really, really spectacular, especially compared to the shit that came later. But that's just me.
Yeah, I've never played any of the Tony Hawk games. I've heard that they're fun. My number 2 is Bloodborne, which I've talked about already a little bit.
Number 2. Oh my god, I didn't expect that.
Yeah, Bloodborne.
Okay.
I had a hard time deciding these, but I do think that Bloodborne is my second favorite game ever. It's very, very good, and it's the right amounts of scary and challenging and rewarding and full of really interesting storytelling props. What's the what's the phrase? It's like atmospheric storytelling or something like that.
Immersive.
Yeah, so it doesn't ever just tell you what's going on. If you care, you look and you find it. And I felt like a detective on top of being a hunter, and that was a really cool experience. So I love Bloodborne. I always will, and I plan to play through it at least once every fall. So that'll be fun. And then my number 1 game that I have ever played personally, drum roll, is The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild.
Oh boy. Okay. Cool.
I think that's one of the best games ever made. I really do. I know that it has received a lot of praise, and I think that it deserves all of it. When I play Legend of Zelda, when I sit down to play that, so I hadn't for a long time. I played it through. I played over 200 hours of it, and then I just kind of stopped. And because at some point you run out of things to do. It feels like you never will, and then you just play it for hours and hours and hours on end. And then you do. I ran out of things to do. A bunch of other things. I got Super Mario Odyssey, which is super, super fun, and I've been playing a lot of that. But just yesterday, in preparation for this podcast, I sat down and I opened Breath of the Wild on my Switch, and I played it for like 15 minutes, and just instantly the feeling came back, the feeling of why that game is incredible. And I don't think I can even describe it. I only have to encourage people to play it. if you haven't already, find a way to, because it's just so fun. The control you have over Link is so fun and so tight. It's a great just a great setup of the way that you're able to play as this character. The story is really good. It isn't, you know, it's not Metal Gear Solid or whatever. It's a simple Nintendo storyline, but it's beautiful, and it's if you take the time to get into it, it deepens these characters that you're very familiar with, and makes them very lovable and sympathetic. And I think that that's fascinating for them to have done on a franchise that in a lot of ways should be burned out by now, you know? Like Zelda's been around.
This.
Yeah, I feel like under normal circumstances, you should not be able to make a game, this many games in a franchise, and in a lot of ways, you know, the most recent games haven't been super well received. They've been loved, but nobody says, oh, this is as good as blank. This is as good as the first Zelda. This is as good as Ocarina of Time, whatever. People just say like, oh yeah, this is another Zelda game. And people like them.
18 years, everyone has been saying Ocarina of Time is a masterpiece. I agree that it is, but you know, when every game emulates that masterpiece, then it sort of just gets jaded over time, and that's what every Zelda game has been doing. You know.
Yeah, and somehow they did it. Somehow they made it new again. Somehow they kept it so Zelda, but they brought it back to life. Yep. Is how I feel. They breathed a breath of the wild into this series. Absolutely. And it really captured me. And I'll love that game till I die. It was a beautiful experience that I'll talk about forever. I'm glad that I had it, because I think that it is comparable for me. The experience that I had with Breath of the Wild is comparable to the experience that many of my contemporaries had. When they played Ocarina of Time. So
I think a lot of people like the joke that how people my age remember Ocarina of Time is how people today legit play Breath of the Wild, because Ocarina of Time is like a shit in the barrel. It's tiny, you know? And it's so minuscule, like the stuff you have to actually see and do. It was amazing for its time, but they had to frame it smaller than you would have hoped in order to make the narrative work. And they were still experimenting with the idea of action RPGs and all that jazz. But then Breath of the Wild comes around and basically accomplishes what we all felt and remembered a game of that scale was back in the day when it really wasn't. Does it make any sense?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's a great way to describe it. Is that the idea that they had when they were making Ocarina of Time is finally able to be made with the technological advancements that has happened since then.
Like shit I would daydream about in the 90s when I was playing Super Nintendo has been realized with like Cuphead and with like other like side-scroller games that are out today. I used to think, oh, it'd be so cool if you fought like an enemy that took up the entire screen, would interact with you dynamically and with great animation and shit. And fuck, they're doing it. You know, they've been doing it.
Yeah.
Arguably, when I played Mischiefmakers on N64, I thought it was at the pinnacle. I was like, this is the best side scroller. But nope. People, as someone said in the chat, people who appreciated the quality stuff of the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo in the 90s had that in their hearts and minds when they grew up to become the programmers of today. And that's why you're seeing a lot of that stuff kind of, you know, in actual reality.
Yeah, what a cool way to think about it. The kids that were excited about it became the adults that are creating it.
Yeah. It's like filmmakers who watch Spielberg and they grow up to make masterpieces themselves. Sorry, go on.
Yes, exactly. No, that's a great. I think that that's one thing that I've learned and that I've loved about video games is that they aren't very different from the things that I already loved. They're not that different from reading a really good book or watching a really good movie. Of course, there are crap video games, but there are also really, really good ones. And I am happy that I've come to a place in my own life. I am excited to play those and experience those instead of frowning upon them. So
it's also fun to it's kind of fun to enjoy crap video games too, you know, at least in this day and age when you no longer have to suffer the burden of having to pay a lot for them. You can have many different ways of getting nostalgic and revisiting, you know, utter garbage shit from the past. But also at the same time to appreciate that there's good stuff as well.
Yeah. I'm excited to hear your top 5. Go for it.
My top five sucks compared to yours, mostly because I don't think it's like a true list. If it was a true list, it wouldn't be it was as worthy a conversation. I chose five that I felt are worthy of being the top five because of how they impacted me, not just as a gamer, but mostly as like a person and like a writer, and just like my general imagination, so to speak. So
Yeah.
it's a bit different than what I would have said as my top five if you'd randomly asked me like a week ago. So
Okay.
here we
Sure.
go. Number five is World of Warcraft. And this I put when I say World of Warcraft, I also put like Warcraft 3 and StarCraft and Warcraft 2 under the same umbrella, basically like the Blizzard experience. And the only reason I played World of Warcraft really is because I was exposed to the lore and Warcraft 3. And the only reason I played Warcraft 3 was because I played StarCraft. The only reason I played StarCraft was because I played like Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness. So it's all related, more or less. I still think Warcraft 3 is one of the best RTS games ever made. People will sit down and have sub sandwiches while watching football or basketball. I'll sit down and I'll eat watching shoutcasts of Warcraft 3. I think it's amazing. But because I played so much Warcraft 3 and like the early millennium, when World of Warcraft came out, I was prepared for that universe. I knew about it. Like imagine if they made a Lewis Carroll Alice in Wonderland MMO. Like you would be on that shit,
Ooh.
right? Exactly.
Heck yeah.
But I didn't get into it right away. I got into it in one of the worst years of my life, 2006, when I was not doing too as well as I wanted to be in college. I was not very comfortable at work. My cat died. I was just not a happy lemur. And on a whim, I'm like, I'm going to try this trial of World of Warcraft because why the fuck not? You know, we're all going to die someday. And I had that
Can't
impression
argue
that
with
like,
that.
that MMOs, they're going to. I mean, I was no longer of the religious mindset, but I still had that kind of gnawing fear in the back of my head, like you do, like, oh, this is of the devil, or this is going to suck my life away. And you know what? It did, but I didn't mind.
It was better than the crap life was thrown at you.
God, World of Warcraft was just so enthralling, and I was never there's a lot of spaghetti-inducing stories I have about World of Warcraft because World of Warcraft is not just a game; it's like a social experience, and that's how a lot of MMOs were. You define it not so much by the game and the storyline because we've had conversation about World of Warcraft, and you have every right to say it sucks because it does suck. Objectively, it's not a good game, but it was addictive enough and it has a nice enough lore to get people interested, and it was how I was able to connect with LB for a long time. Back in 2008, when I had a girlfriend, she played World of Warcraft. He says a lot of people I've known have played World of Warcraft. It's like
Sure. So it's meaningful.
yes, it's meaningful and it's like a society kind of in a way, and it's evolved throughout the years. And I have lots of memories attached to it of like guilds I was part of, Desperados, which was incorporated into Utan and Ofarodi. Australia basically is based on the guild that LB and I had. We were the Desperados. We're a two-person guild. It was stupid and was silly.
Desperado.
Pretty much,
Why don't you come to your senses?
That is sexy as that, granted. But and another thing about World of Warcraft is like the diarrhea of fantasy lore. People of Blizzard obviously don't have an imagination, so they just grab from everything. And so, but they do it in such a cookie cutter way that it works like fast food. So, the trolls have a voodoo knockoff religion. Like the elves are all druids. You have mages. You have like a Christian. You have a substitute for Christianity with like the Church of the Light.
Yeah, I like all that kind of stuff. I really do.
But they just throw it all at a dartboard and somehow it all sticks. And like if you imagine like a universe where every religion is somehow true and yet doesn't conflict with one another, you get that with World of Warcraft and with the lore of Azeroth. And while that sounds stupid, and it probably is, it sort of inspired me to think you can get really stupidly complex in a fantasy world and still kind of make it work, because people will buy it for the sheer, exposure and like the consistency of it. And so much when I world build with like Australia, and like even when I did it with Indoponies and stuff, I see different portions of the fictitious world almost as like expansions of World of Warcraft, because World of Warcraft is a train that's been going since like 2006, and they have to like or 2005, I believe, maybe even older than that. God, I've been losing track of time. And they've done like what, I think 6, 7 expansions by now. How do they keep the content? How do they keep people from keep playing it without reinventing it? Like say Nintendo had the luxury to do with like Breath of the Wild. They have to keep it the same. So they're constantly doing things in the world to expand on the lore, and make it interesting. And I see it as a challenge when I start a new book in Australia. I'm like, okay, let's go to a new zone, as it were, that we weren't in the previous, expansion. And so like that tells me how to go about a formula of doing world building. And there's a lot of shit from World of Warcraft I incorporate into Australia, and a lot of other stories that I kind of borrowed, just like they borrowed from other, legit fantasies. And so I can't pretend to say that it's not having made an impact on my life. A culmination of a train of RTS games I've played since like 2000 and like 3, even before that, as a matter of fact, like 98, I think I was playing Warcraft 2.
Wow.
Yeah, and so it's just it's inseparable. And so but it's also had a negative impact on me in that playing World of Warcraft watered down the concept of what it means to be playing a game. It's no longer something you do with a clear objective. You do it to pass time and to sort of chat with your friends. So it's like a substitute of like instant messenger or something,
Yeah.
And I would often, and even now, I've gone back to World of Warcraft. I resubscribed for like a month, and I'll have something playing on in the background, from maybe like on Netflix or maybe on YouTube or something. I'm just sitting back grinding my hunter or something while getting a Dr. Pepper high and just being exposed to this thing in the background. It's not really true gaming, but because of that experience, that sense of like osmotic kind of watered down like gaming, it's kind of dulled my senses to everything else, which is rather unfortunate. That's where I was going into earlier about how I don't like get into single player story based stuff as much, is
Yeah.
because I've had things like World of Warcraft and Guild Wars and Second Life kind of getting me into this idea of like, it's just time killing, not so much
Yeah.
a gaming experience. And I can't really change that about myself, for better or for worse. So it kind of deserves to be in the top 5, even though their games, I believe, are objectively better. It's had this impact on me.
That's great. I think that's great. I don't think anybody would complain about that. It's quite cool. Quite a good
Prop,
story.
Props is saying that he's still down for the WoW video. Maybe I'll have to explain that to you at some point, Punky.
Sure.
Number 4 is similar to number 5, but I have way more positive memories of it, and that's Team Fortress 2 by Valve. I wish I got into the missives where I wrote to you about my experience on FUG servers with Team Fortress 2. A lot of people who claim these days a PC master race are people who found a niche online with other people. We're talking like the Counter-Strike crowd, or the people who played lots of like Return to Castle Wolfenstein or Quake, these really popular arena battle games where they'd be fighting each other endlessly. They're like, and Valve was like very good at sort of cultivating this kind of culture of how you just jump into like a private server and you make friends and you just go at it, and you make entire like networks of social connections because of this. This happened to me with Team Fortress 2 in 2008. I bought a gaming laptop because I wanted to experience some stuff on PC that I wasn't experiencing on console, and I had played the really shitty version of Team Fortress 2 on the 360 on Half-Life Orange Box, and while it was really ghetto, I think it was only like 8 on 8 or something, as opposed to like 16 on 16, and it just was really, it's just not the best version of Team Fortress 2 out there. I was addicted to the gameplay style. I could tell it was a great game. It's a class-based arena hero shooting game, team-based versus. You have to play it to understand it. But I booted up on my PC, and I remember jumping into a random server. It was a recreation of a Unreal Tournament 2004 map called Convoy, and it was just these two vehicles riding down this canyon endlessly, which is something you don't normally get in Valve servers. And this person were audibly welcoming me with this uh, it was just this really cheerful voice and everything. And I'm like, okay, cool. These people are friendly. And I left. And then the next day I came back to the same server and I had this guy saying, hey, Space is a Waste, welcome back. And I'm like, oh my God, he remembered me. And that instantly got me hooked to this one server. And I would play it.
I remember that. Yeah. I remember you telling me that.
I would play it every day and every night, and suddenly it was like Cheers, where everybody knows your name. You just, when you had a long day at work, you maybe had a shitty day, whatever. You come home, you jump on the server for 2 or 3 hours, and there's like there's like maybe 30 to 40 people who I know by voice just by hanging out in this FUG server like group, and it was something I've not experienced since. I mean, I have friends obviously online with you and Props and Lemur Cave and Noble Jury and stuff, but this was just something. This is like another level where just people would just play this versus match with all chat, killing each other endlessly in this non-stop canyon, just chatting with each other. And eventually the Team Fortress experience spread to other maps and everything, but I was part of a community for about 2 years, maybe 3 years. That just was really cool. It put me in a happy place when things were going up and down in my life, and I owe them for getting to the Brony fandom, because it was like their server that that they had like a pony thread, and that planted the seed that eventually got me involved with like FemFic and Questry Daily and everything else. So it had an obvious impact on my life, in addition to many other things. And like an idiot like father with like a camcorder, I recorded a lot of shit through Fraps, and I like immortalized a lot of those moments, which is only cool to me, but they exist on YouTube, just looking really bad with their frame rate and stuff. But it's a lot of good memories, from that. So that's number 4.
That's great.
Number 3 is Silent Hill 2 on the PS2. And Silent Hill 2, you know all about that because you watched the best friends play that, if I'm not mistaken.
I did. That's right.
Silent Hill 2 is a game I would tell someone that in this day and age of like Outcast and Resident Evil 7 and a lot of other immersive survival horror games, doesn't quite have the same oomph that it does. But I think the storytelling style is immortal, and the subtlety about it is like beyond compare. I remember buying it from EB Games back in the day. It was pre-owned. I had a boner for Resident Evil 1 remake on GameCube, and I wanted more like it. And so I'm like, I'll give Silent Hill a try. Not playing 1 or anything else in a franchise. And I went in with like 0 expectations, and it blew my mind. With the presentation, with the story twist, with all the layers of themes you can comment on in that game, and just the aesthetic of it, the idea of like subdimensional worlds within worlds that are sort of defined by one's Freudian issues and stuff, that the world that you see is the world that you deserve and whatnot. It just had this permanent impact on me, and with the concept of horror in general. And I feel like almost every time I write a horror story, there's just waves and waves of influence from Silent Hill 2. And then the other Silent Hill games I would play later on, they ended up sucking after 3, arguably. But 2 was like the one that took the cake, and just everything about it inspires me. And Zappinator saying Silent Hill is best Lyra game. That's a reference to the fact
I was just about to say something about that too.
That Silent Ponyville, written by Jake Hiratagu, was tangentially the inspiration for doing Background Pony. One of many different inspirations for it, because there was a the Silent Ponyville series was a thing in 2011, 2012, written by Sam Rose / Jake Hiratagu, and he frequented a live stream run by Spotlight, and I one day on a whim decided to make a fanfic set within that universe, and said, hey, what would you think about me writing a side fic, hint hint, to just show off my my gums. And he was impressed by it, but to follow his to get his blessing, I had to wait until he finished like some book he was on, like another fanfic. And I guess in my impatience, I'm like, what can I do to tweak this idea and make it more original? And then it turned into an obsession with Lyra in general. And then that Lyra obsession turned into, what can I do original that's cool? And it kind of mutated into Background Pony. So
I wonder, I wonder what masterpiece I would have written if instead of saying, yeah, sure, you can shove Lyra in your stupid sister's fic. If I was like, can I use Lyra and the sisters do? And you were like, well, hold on, let me finish the book first. I I wonder how different life would be right now.
That would have been such a douchebag. But no, Sam wasn't a douchebag. That was just because he
Yeah,
didn't.
no, I know
He didn't.
that.
It was taking place in his continuity. Sisters do involving Lyra had no effect on the continuity background point. For all we know, maybe it happens in the same universe. You know, I don't
Probably
think there's
not.
much.
It's an alternate universe where she just sort of keeps living the way that she's living forever.
Silent Hill 2 sort of impacted my concept of storytelling forever. I would say the same of Metal Gear Solid 2, but it'd be embarrassing to have two Konami games on the same top 5, so I chose Silent Hill. Number 2, and this one is pretty self-explanatory. I had to put it up there. Is Super Mario Bros. 3.
Yeah.
It's the best game from my childhood, just hands down. Yeah.
I'm just gonna keep doing this while you talk.
Quoting the theme song Super Mario Brothers 1, but whatever. Super Mario Brothers 3 is arguably like the best game in terms of difficulty and presentation of all the Mario franchise, I believe. I think 2 is too repetitive, and 1 is too stupidly, annoyingly hard at the end with like the mazes and stuff. But 3, I beat 3 and I felt accomplished. When I got
it's
to the end,
hard though.
it took me a while. You know, as a kid, it didn't happen to me overnight. I remember getting so close. This one summer, we were moving. We sort of like subletted out of my grandmother's condominium for like 2 months, and I had Super Mario Bros. 3 booted up on this this TV screen on the bottom floor, and it must have been the longest I laid up for, the longest I stayed up for. That my childhood. I must have been up past midnight trying to beat it, and I couldn't. There's no password system in Mario Bros. 3. You have to know how to use the warp whistles if you have to go back to where you're at. And when I got to Bowser and I beat him, you know, there's a trick to it, and you had to figure the trick out. And I felt so proud of myself when I did it, you know. And it's a game that I think still works when you play it on repeat, you know, on repeat visits. Hard, yeah, but there are harder games than that, believe me, especially in the NES era. Super Mario Bros. 3, in my opinion, for an avid gamer, is like the perfect kind of degree of difficulty.
That's so interesting.
Super Mario World was
I'm trying to like it, and it is amazing. Like it's really fun even today, but I just die all the time, and I can't ever move forward, and I don't understand the pipes and all that stuff, and it just feels like I have to start over every time I get nicked 3 times.
Well,
and coming from a world of health bars, it just doesn't make any sense.
Back in the day, you know, a lot of people couldn't program. Either they didn't have the ability or they didn't have the money to make a game of that length. So they would just make it stupidly hard, and you could barely like beat the first or second level. Mario Bros. 3 was different. They had longevity to it. They had personality. The first 2 or 3 levels are a breeze, and then by about World 4 or 5, it starts getting difficult, and then 7 and 8 are brutal. So it's like a legit increase in difficulty.
I can't get past level 1. I can't get past the pyramid in front of the castle.
Well, we're not going to talk about that. So Mario 3, I mean, I have to include it in the top 10. It's just because it's like the best game out there. In my opinion, it's the best Mario game. You know, Mario 64 obviously is amazing. Mario World, people say that's the best Mario game. I think when I played it, I felt that was too easy. I beat Mario World in a fucking Walmart when they had it on like a display. You know, and they didn't have a way to reboot it, so it was stuck on the game over screen. Like, well, I did my duty, I'm gone. You know, but Mario 3, that was the bee's knees. And number 1 favorite video game of all time on any list I could concoct, and this remains true, and it's probably no surprise, is Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask on the N64.
Yeah.
Time more. Hell, I played Resident Evil 1 on the GameCube more, but Majora's Mask has my chest vacuole in its palm, you know. It happened when autumn hit, so it was like the perfect time of the year. 2000 was one of the most chill years of my life. I was listening to a lot of like Kid A by Radiohead and looking on the news to see who was going to become president by the end of the week because nobody knew. It's just whatever. Okay, I'm going to Termina. Just everything about Majora's Mask, the experience of playing it, hit right. The sense of going through the looking glass, or through the rabbit hole, I should say, of going to like another world, of being this one supremely important, innocent hero upon which the entire world's destiny hinges, but nobody knows about it but you and a fairy. and having to live with that sense of like unsung accomplishment obviously
Nice.
had a lot of overtones that struck with me, and I feel like the desire I had in my heart to see Link be recognized for his deeds, which obviously would never happen, on the stick that it creates fan fiction. You know, almost every one-shot romance that I write on FimFic is an unrequited thing. It's like it begins at the kiss, it begins at the hug. There's no actual like romance that happens. It's always like teasing. It's like cock teasing, blue balling in my fanfics, because I believe if you actually make everything you want to have happen, if you do a full catharsis, I don't think it's as good of a feeling as you get from something that's unrequited, because when you experience something that feels a little unfinished, you experience it yourself viscerally. You feel like you're immersed in it to finish it yourself through your own imagination. Does that make any sense?
I completely agree with that. And on a random note, I think that's why the Star Wars prequels failed. But
yeah, that's good.
I think that's a great comment. No, it really is. I think that's a fantastic reason to love that game, to love Background Pony, to love these things that have that feeling of like, well, wait a minute, you know, but what about all the gaps? And the author doesn't say, well, screw the gaps. They say, well, what do you think? You know, and that's the beautiful part. I think that's the difference.
You're talking about in Bloodborne how the storytelling isn't very obvious. It's like a
precisely
subtlety.
Yeah, subtlety. Subtlety is the name of the game. There is this this awareness that you're leaving a lot open without sacrificing the story that you do tell, and that's a powerful balance, and it's hard to do, but Majora's Mask did it perfectly.
People make those arguments about, are video games art? Do they have layers to them? Do they have things you can philosophically converse about? And, you know, the person I probably talked to the most of my life about anything is LB. I mean, we don't really chat these days, but for like a long period of time, almost 10 years, we would talk about everything, and we'd almost, so much that we'd almost know what each other is thinking, you know? And our go-to conversation when it came to video games, like what's the best video game, what has multiple layers of metaphors and themes that he can talk about, and his was Final Fantasy VII, and the closest I could come to Nintendo-wise was Majora's Mask. And I would argue that Majora's Mask doesn't have as many layering of themes as Final Fantasy VII, because it can't. Final Fantasy VII was like, had so much text and so much like written dialogue and storytelling and length to it that you really can't make a comparison. But Majora's Mask, in the way it's delivered, there's so many unanswered questions that intrigue and that sort of inspire and that mystify. Yeah. There's a lot of unhappy stuff that happens in Majora's Mask that's like unfinished, that's unsolved. Even though you save the world, there's still things you cannot save, like the Deku butler's kid. You can't save him. You can't save Darmani. You can't save like Mikau, you know, the Zora.
Yeah.
There's a sense of loss, and yet kind of like a sense of rebirth as well. There's so many layers to it. And you also think to yourself, like, is this an alternative universe? Is this a dreamscape? There are people who have this really popular modern argument that it's all a metaphor, that he's either dead or where he's experiencing a metaphorical like interpretation of his stages of grief after having lost Navi from Ocarina of Time. There's so many layers to it. And that on top of the nostalgia factor I have for it, even though I haven't played as much as other games, it's just, it has this part of my heart that like the music and everything just takes me back. And it's evident in a lot of the stuff that I've written. Tempted to write recursive fix to it, but I could never finish it because of obvious reasons. Like, I wrote a story that was called Link Has a Voice, and was attempting to do like a sequel to Majora's Mask and explaining, like, you know, my ideas of like how it could be wrapped up and stuff. I wrote in 2002 an X-Men fanfic called Between the Walls. I don't know if I ever wrote to you about this in the missives, but it was about a mutant like kid who wakes up to his mutant powers by being teleported as a ghost inside Xavier's Institute for like gifted youngsters, and he's in like a ghost form. Nobody can hear him, nobody can talk to him, but he has like this sort of osmotic like effect on everyone, and that I felt was like a blueprint for what again, Background Pony, this idea of being stuck in a place but not being able to be known, but still still having an impact on it. That niche, that sort of Groundhog's Day idea, I'm in love with that, and that's kind of what Background Pony was all about. It was like the idea of like a situation, but instead of like a chronological time loop that is making everyone chronologically reboot to day one, everyone just proceeds with their life, but you're not a part of it, but you have the ability to affect them. And that sense of like of memory loss, of being forgotten, but still being known for what you have done, that play with like amnesia and shit. I love that to death. And Majora's Mask is part of that because it's not exactly a good feeling. It's extremely bittersweet. And as a storyteller and as a writer, it just affects me on this really integral level. And as I've grown older and become more nihilistic and existential, I feel it has everlasting impact as well.
Wow. That was beautiful. No, that was fantastic. I think that you hit a lot of great points there. I'd like to say that I think that a lot of Zelda is about loss.
Yeah, very true.
And even in Breath of the Wild, I felt it many times. Breath of the Wild doesn't try to be Majora's Mask, and of course it doesn't. It isn't in the same genre, and it doesn't give you the same feelings. But I hope that you do play it one day, because there are definitely moments that have that feeling which is weird because it's a very colorful game. It's a very big, adventurous game. There's something about the music, about the intentional ambiance of this like loneliness. And anyway, it still deals a lot with loss, and I think that there's something powerful about that in any medium, and that video games can do it well because it in a lot of ways it is a solitary experience. Even when you do sit on the couch and play it with friends, when that can happen, good video games like Majora's Mask are single player games where you're sitting there and you're experiencing this largely on your own.
Yeah.
When the character is doing something similar, it just emphasizes that idea of loss, of loneliness, of solitariness, and of what you can accomplish by yourself. And I think that's something that video games do really, really well, that you literally can't experience that in other ways. And so I'd like to sort of finish at least what I need to say with that thought, that I am so glad that I decided or that I realized maybe that I was convinced by people that I care about that video games are a lot more than really, in a lot of ways, video games are the pinnacle of all art and creativity that people have done. Visual mediums, audio mediums, writing and performing, and technological advancements, and complicated, well thought out progress and story. All of these different things come together into one medium that becomes very powerful and very affecting. And I've been very affected by video games, and I'm so glad for it. I'm glad that I didn't dismiss those my whole life, and I actually look forward to playing more and more and more as I mature and get older and things change. I did want to ask, you mentioned a little bit that there was a game or a moment in the past where you thought, like, how could it get better than this? That it was kind of the pinnacle of gaming, and now we've come so far. What do you think happens next? Because absolutely there will be a day when I look at even the beauty of Breath of the Wild. It's a gorgeous game, but one day I'll look at it and say, wow, we've come so far in graphics and in technological advancements. Sort of where you stand, can you guess where it's going? Is it virtual reality or? I'm pretty
cynical about a lot of that. VR, as Props is echoing in the chat, is making a resurgence, but again, on the topic of angry video game nerd, VR had an attempt before and fucking failed. I remember being a major gamer in like the mid-90s when CD-ROM was making its way to console, and CD-ROM they made a wholehearted attempt, but people rushed into it. They rushed into the allure of the technology, and this was like the age of the Sega Genesis, the 3DO, the Philips CDI.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting one. I think Magnavox had something at the time. A lot of stuff was released in like 94, 95, I believe, and it was supposed to be like the new wave of like video games, and they were expecting the technology to take it, and they were just tossing money at this shit. Okay, and I remember there's a local video game establishment around where I live called Rhino Video Games. Rhino Video Games would let you rent and buy games for Sega Genesis, for Super Nintendo, for Sega Game Gear, for Game Boy. And I remember walking in one day, and all that shit was gone. And instead, like the walls were covered with Sega CD and 3DO. And I'm like, so what happened to all the games? It's like, well, we're going full like modern gen, next gen now. I'm like, okay. And I left, and the next time I went by there, they were closed. They were out of business.
Wow.
There was this real shit time, in my opinion, in the mid '90s where like the dying age of the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis were technology. They're thinking, what do we have to do next? Where do we go next? And until PlayStation 1 came around, they didn't quite handle it. And even then, like the first or second year of PlayStation 1 sucked ass. Period where everyone's like, oh, we have CD-ROM technology now. We can make that like portable for the home. Let's go with it. And they just bombed. I think embracing technology, while it's good and technology can help the video gaming industry, you can't trust it too much. You can't pour everything into
totally
the technology and expect it to be like the thing. So I look at the VR, and I sell VR to customers, and I'm like, hey, you want to play a Batman game where you stand like dead still in the middle of the alley where anybody can shoot you for like 5 minutes trying to solve a dead body crime right in front of you because you can't move because the VR programmers haven't figured out a way to get you to move around in a way that isn't janky in a VR environment. You want to play Batman, the stand-up, sit-down game? That's where we're at. We have to work a way around that. So I think people have to figure out a gaming mechanic that will revolutionize the actual medium, and then work on storytelling to accompany that. An example of that would be Portal. Like Portal 1 and Portal 2 had a really good game mechanic, and they worked a really good story around that. I think Majora's Mask did that with the idea of like a time loop mechanic. It was sort of like the genesis of something that became Grand Theft Auto 3. I wish I could convince you to enjoy the Grand Theft Auto series, but Grand Theft Auto 3 was like remarkable for its time because they created a living, breathing world with like a day and night cycle that ran smoothly and was believable and had like a subtle nuance to it that made the rest of the Grand Theft Auto series and stuff like Red Dead Redemption and L.A. Noire work so well, and even eventually stuff like Skyrim and L.A. Noire. Skyrim and like Witcher. So I think we need another thing like that, a video gaming mechanic that grabs people by the storm. I feel like the latest thing that was refreshing was like the Dark Souls franchise, which kind of more or less infected Breath of the Wild. It said you don't need to have all games be easy and cookie cutter. You can have things where you cannot possibly make a strategy guide for because it's so asymmetrical and fucking weird and random. Just make a janky world that is believable. Like Grand Theft Auto 5 online and Grand Theft Auto 4 online works because it's just a stupid static city with no balance to it. The middle of it, and it's unfair, but hey, life is unfair. Just go and explore and find like the parts of the world that are advantageous for you in the multiplayer interaction and immersion. Just realizing that you don't have to make everything like a Call of Duty like cookie cutter kind of
Call of Duty
thing.
shooter man.
Yeah, Call of Duty shooter man. Just be static boringness that you and the experiencing it can like add and inject the liveliness to it. And I think they are learning to do that with games like Mario Odyssey and with like Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. They create the giant world for you to jump into, and you don't necessarily have to have everything explained to you. Just kind of explore from the inside out. That's one thing I think they could
Odyssey is so good.
The mechanic from Majora's Mask and from Dead Rising. They can make something with that. You know, people like stuff like Undertale because the storytelling mechanic is just so refreshing. I think it's going to be in the gameplay, and I think it's going to be in the storytelling. I don't personally believe VR has it yet, because they tried before, they bombed, and they're trying it again, but it's still too niche, in my opinion, to work. People, I think, still need a regular medium of input and output.
I very much agree with you. I've played some VR games that have been a lot of fun, but I also talked with my father-in-law, who wrote, I mean, decades ago, he wrote his thesis when he was graduating from college about virtual reality and video games. He was an engineer and worked with computers, and he today, you know, owns a PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation VR, and that's all of the VR experiences that I've had, and some of the games have been a ton of fun. But he says exactly the same thing: is that VR is fun and it's cool. It's not new. You know, like we had a lot of what we needed a long time ago, and it's just taken a long time. And the reason is not that, I mean, like, if they had started working on VR back when he wrote his paper on it, it would be more popular today, because anyway, it would have advanced a lot faster, is his point. The point is never that the medium isn't interesting. It is very interesting and it's a lot of fun. The point is that it isn't what people want. It's the technology isn't the important part, just like what you're saying. The inventiveness, it has to be fun. A video game has to be fun in front of everything else. And I think that, like Props is saying, VR needs more time. And I also don't think that it will ever replace what we have. There will be fun VR games. It won't be that every single video game is virtual reality. And I hope to see a lot more games along the lines of Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey, which I didn't talk about, but I've played through already twice, and it's amazing. I don't like Call of Duty, and I know that there's a big market for that people like it. I don't like these hyper-realistic games. I like when it's designed funny, you know, when it's a cartoon. Yeah. I like when...
That's part of why I love TF2 so much, because Team Fortress 2 is like so immortal because of the design they went through. They knew ahead of time that it was a game that would last a while, and they built it to look good even with like a 10-year hindsight.
Yes, exactly. So I think that style, design, creativity, those are what make a good game. And the sooner that the industry learns that, the better. But I don't know if they ever really will. Obviously, there are the people in the industry that understand that. I think Nintendo really gets it. I think that there are people at even Ubisoft and other companies that really get it. Even Skyrim and, you know, and some other Elder Scrolls games have this very particular style that isn't necessarily going for realistic. It's just going for beautiful and interesting, and that's cool. So anyway, I don't know where we're going with that.
We said we were going to potentially end with like with honorable mentions. I would venture to suggest something else, since we've gone on for so long. Why don't we end with you and I each telling an anecdote of our absolute best video game experience ever? Because I have one.
Okay, go for it. Yeah. No, tell us. So I'm very interested in that. That's a great way to end.
I love to tell this one when people say, "What's your best video game experience ever?" And this is the one I have to tell. This is from Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, that was released in 2004, which I still think, maybe with nostalgia goggles, is like one of the best video games years ever. Like that year was Halo 2, it was Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, it was Metal Gear Solid 3. I think Half-Life 2 came out that year. Holy shit. A lot of stuff came out in 2004. It was amazing. San Andreas, basically the third 3D Grand Theft Auto game. Takes place in a knockoff of California in the early 90s. You're playing an African-American guy who grew up in the hood named CJ. And one day I had to go to work, and I had time to kill, like a half an hour to kill before work. And when you got half an hour to kill in Grand Theft Auto, you don't do any of the main missions. You just do random shit, you know, on the street. And so I was driving around in CJ's neighborhood, and which is basically a knockoff version of Los Angeles. They called Los Santos. and it's supposed to be like deep in the hood. And I was like, yeah, I'm bored. I'm just going to toss a random grenade and see what happens, because the world tends to dynamic react to you. So I tossed a grenade, and I think it landed beneath like this Volkswagen Vanagon, and it blew up. And in the mechanics of Grand Theft Auto, you get like wanted stars because you cause mayhem. So I think I got like 2 stars, and so I knew the police were after me. So like, I gotta get in the car. I gotta drive out of the boondocks so that I lose the police. And so I jumped into a random convertible, and I pulled the guy. There's 2 black guys in a car. I pulled like the driver out, but the passenger stayed in the car. Normally they just run off because they're scared. Well, in the game, in the world of San Andreas, I was street. It's basically CJ's neighborhood. And so as I'm driving along, the passenger in the car starts talking to me, CJ, by name. Like, watch the rim, CJ. It's like, be careful on the paint job, CJ. And I realized, because I had just in like the neighborhood I grew up in, my character grew up in, the random NPC was like a friend of his that he grew up with, that he knew, tangentially through like the hood or something. And so he's not bothering to get out of the car. He's just casually bad-mouthing me for like banging up his cars and trying to get away from cops. And so that just blew my mind. And I'm driving out of the city limits, and I take this railroad tunnel like outside the city limits, and I lose the cops, but I turn the car over, and we're both, the car's rolled over. Me and this computer controlled AI NPC are like beneath the car. We both climb out at the same time. And the mechanic of GTA is that when a car rolls over, it automatically blows up. And so we're both running for our lives. It's like I'm playing with this player online, but it's just it's like a computer generated like AI, and the car blows up. And so it's just me and this random NPC lost in the woods. And he's like, man, fuck this shit. And he's walking across the railroad, and I hear this like engine. I turn, and it's like a scene at a Final Destination, like this steam engine just bam slams him dead. I'm like, holy shit. and the train goes by, and he's dead he's spaghetti. Okay, and there's this money lying on the ground. I'm like, well, I pick up his money and I run back into town. And for me, that was mind-blowing, that like they could program the game that had that experience. That first off, the random NPC knew me, like, because he spawned in like the neighborhood of like CJ's upbringing, and that we rolled with the car over, and he would be programmed to climb out of it, and we're both running at the same time for the car exploding. And he's like, man, fuck this shit. And then he walked into a railroad track, and just all these things layered on top of each other. You can't recreate that.
No,
and
you can't.
It was all like randomly generated, yet it happened perfectly because of all the time they put into that game.
Wow, amazing. Well, I don't want to ruin that with any silly made-up idea that I could come up with. So I think that's a great place to end it. Video games are great. I'm happy to be on board. Anybody that there are a lot of people that are very excited about lots of different games. And I think that's awesome. I don't think that somebody at some point in the chat talked about how in this industry of interactive entertainment, you're going to find something that you like, and everybody likes something a little bit different. Like, oh my gosh, there is so much content right now, and it's such a huge industry, and so many people are pumping it out. I am so excited to be on board and to watch this continue to change and evolve. And thank you all for listening to our experiences. I'm glad that you've had your own, and I hope that we keep having exciting new video game experiences for years to come.
But seriously, middle lane, good. Goodbye, everybody.